have like I have stuff like let me see here. My biggest point is like the woman equals Jerusalem. It says the most compelling evidence that the woman is Jerusalem is that Scripture says it is where Jesus was crucified. Revelation 11:8,
Right.
and their dead bodies shall lie in the streets of the great city,
Correct.
which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where our Lord was crucified. Old Covenant Jerusalem is called a great city. Jeremiah 22, verse 6 through 8. And I'll just read that, I guess. Even though I'm like talking to the choir, but not Revelation, Jeremiah 22, verses 6 through 8 says, and it says, for thus says the Lord concerning the house of the king of Judah, you are like Gilead to me, like the summit of Lebanon. Yet surely I will make you a desert and an uninhabited city. I will prepare destroyers against you, each with his weapons, and they shall cut down the choice cedars and cast them into the fire. And many nations will pass through this uh, city, and every man will say to his neighbor, why has the Lord dwelt with this great city? So right there, in Jeremiah it calls it a great city.
Absolutely.
And then you have, so in that verse, it says it's a great city. Then you have Sodom in, actually in Isaiah 1 through 10 and Jeremiah 23:14. Jeremiah 23:14 says, uh, but the prophets of Jerusalem, I have seen a horrible thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen their hands of evildoers so that no one turns from their evils. All have become like Sodom to me, and the inhabitants like Gomorrah. And then Jeremiah 1 through 10, let's
Mm-hmm.
see, Isaiah. So that one's a good one. And then Egypt is a stretch, but I think it kind of fits because in Galatians 4:22 through 25, the old covenant is compared as like Hagar,
Right.
and in Genesis 25:12, she's the Egyptian. So, you know, it's really interesting stuff. I mean, I have a lot of other stuff, but again, it's like preaching to the choir.
Even the beginning of Isaiah, who is
Yeah,
the faithful
one
city
through 10.
that has become a harlot? How can you be the harlot to God if you weren't married to God?
Exactly, and I always say that. Like, people want to be like, oh, well, it's Rome. It's just like, well, it's talking about in the old covenant, and Rome wasn't around then, so the only people that were around during those time is Jerusalem. They're the only ones that can say that you know, you're a whore
Mm-hmm.
because I was with you and you committed adultery.
Yep.
Makes sense to me, but again, people are, today on Facebook, somebody had posted on, I follow like the Reform page and stuff like
Mm.
that. So, and on that, it's like the Reform saga, very like, obviously Calvinistic and all their understanding. But like the main admin is like an all millennialist, like so like partial preterist. And it's a very big Facebook page, so like a lot of people will, kind of debate in the comments and everything. And somebody had posted the book of Revelation, and the person said, like, oh, every time I'm about to read this book, I think I'm gonna learn more, but in reality, I know nothing about it. And I read some of the comments, and there's like people saying, like, oh yeah, this is all about 70 A.D., the destruction of the temple, and then I'm like, yes, it is. It's all about 70 A.D. And then somebody comments says that's called preterism, and that's a heresy. And I'm like, yeah.
Well, I
And
never
I said
understood.
something like, what
I
happened?
never, I never understood Revelation, and then I remember a couple of years ago I prayed. I sure would really like to understand this book because it is so cryptic to me. And then I get presented with full preterism, and now it makes perfect sense. Never made sense to me before when I was a futurist, and now it makes sense to me.
Wait, so you're telling me you never understood the seven-headed dragons and all that
No,
kind of stuff?
right?
No, the woman that sits on the dragon.
It just completely just
Yeah.
like went way over my head. I'm like, hmm. But I was at a Bible study today, and this guy was saying, "Yeah, well, I'm going to be, asked if I'm going to have that 666 put on my hand and my forehead, and I'm going to say no, and I'm going to get beheaded." And I just sort of sit there and I smile. I didn't want to create disruption, but I'm thinking to myself, I never thought about this before. They think that they would be given a choice on whether or not they wanted to have this 666 on their hands and their forehead. But if you look throughout history, you'll see that the mass population is never given a choice in anything. They're just herded up and done to what other people have determined to do for them. So the idea that you have a choice to choose this 666, curse that's in Revelation is not is not probable or logical.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know about all that. Because anyways, it's a computer chip in your hand.
Yes. What do you guys say about the mark?
I know Rob has some. He showed us like some coins where like, I mean, again, it's even in the full preterism movement, nobody really like, I guess, knows 100% like everything. But I mean, Rob does make a pretty good argument with. He shows a coin of like the Roman like coin where it has like a picture of like Nero's like head, so you can see like
Mhm.
his forehead, and then on the other side it's like his right arm or something like
Yeah,
that.
he's holding up his right hand on the other side.
The only thing is
Yes,
with
that's pretty compelling.
when I see something like that, okay, so I see the mark of the beast, and that's on the hand and the forehead. But isn't there also like a seal of the Holy Spirit? Isn't
Right.
that on the forehead and also on the hand, or is it just on the
Yes.
I
forehead?
mean, I know in the
But
Old Testament, God says, "Write these commandments on your arm and put them
right,
on the
oh,
front
right,
lips
oh,
of your
absolutely.
of your
Okay, so
forehead."
we have two diametrically opposed things. So if there was like a Christian coin that would be disseminated, then yeah, I would say, okay, well, the mark of the beast, it holds a lot of weight for, it being, Nero's coin or something like that. But
There was a Christian coin. They if they didn't use the Roman coin, they were chopped and killed.
okay, do you have this picture of this Christian coin?
No, I have the actual coin, bro. I've been collecting them for years.
Or you need to go to the right. But so to me, it's more like figurative, because your hand deals with your actions, and your mind, your head deals with your thoughts. And so it's what is taking up your time, and what are you doing, kind of thing, if that makes sense. I take it more
But then
like that.
what's the buying? Because that's the thing. Like my friend
Well,
John came over to my house yesterday, and we were talking a lot about full preterism and stuff. And he says like, a lot of full preterism is more like allegorical and more like, but in reality, it's like, well, not at the same time. Like we would still say like the destruction, like killing, the blood, like all that stuff is literal. Like that stuff did happen. But the problem is the understanding of the word "gi," meaning the whole world, but it's really just the land. So there was destruction. So I could imagine, like during that time period, like it physically meant like you couldn't buy anything if you didn't have this certain coin or mark or
well, yeah,
whatever. I mean, that's a possibility.
right. But you made a very good point about the Jews and how they bound Torah to their foreheads and to their arms and hands. They would have these long straps, and they still do that today. And so if
It's
you
found to fill in and like buried, so and like goes that dates back to the first century.
do what
So
now?
they were doing that even in Jesus's day. They were
Right,
doing that in Jesus's day. In Matthew
right,
chapter 23, he actually says, phylacteries, and that
right. And so
is
this was
like the
the
Greek for it.
right, the Old Testament Torah. And how many times do we see Paul saying, this was the old way, this is the new way. You had the law, on tablets. Now you've got the law in your heart, so that this understanding of, the spirit being bound to your hand and bound to your forehead is like the Jews had with their Torah, that they wanted to hold on to it everywhere they went. That as far as the Christian understanding and your conforming to the image of Christ and you're seeking to do every good work, that you're carrying that everywhere you go. Does that make sense?
No, I mean, I
In other words,
definitely can see what you're saying for sure.
finding the Torah in these little black boxes was a foreshadow of the true spiritual way that we are to do it.
I mean, personally, I would even say, like, I know for a fact when they got that commandment, he definitely wasn't like, all right, come on, guys, let's get your tefillin out. I think that was like a rabbinical interpretation. Right. They would actually put, just like where it says you'll write the commandments on the doorpost, and the people have the little, man, I forget the Hebrew word for what they call it, but mezuzah or something like that. Mm-hmm. And, that's what they actually have. Like, it's literally just Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 through like 9 scrolled up on the door. They put it on the doorpost. It's also scrolled up inside the box that you put on your forehead and on your arm, and then you wrap it up. So they're actually just putting that commandment like in the box, but like in the it's actually talking about all the commandments. It's not just talking about Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 through 9 or 4 through 11 or whatever, or 6 through 11 or whatever. It would be like what you're saying. It's really not like a physical, literal thing you're doing. It's like meditating on his word day and night and acting upon it and doing it in your actions. That's what makes more sense to me. The Jewish people just made some junk up. But who knows? I mean, we could just go back in time and watch it. So pretty gnarly.
Have you guys talked about the other topic at all, as far as the angels, like whether like seed of Satan or if angels had sex? Have you guys talked about that?
No, we
more crazy doctrine, John.
Right. I was just wondering because we've covered a lot of the crazy stuff we've already talked about. Wanted a way to hit that too.
It's like, hey, Matthews, hey, thanks for coming on our hangout. We just want to put everything out on the table, right, and be like, this is exactly what we all disagree with. But here you go.
So what? Half you guys are one way on that, half the other. What do you?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Roughly, have you actually I don't know, Stacy, have you went through everything with him so far?
No, we haven't even touched that subject really.
Ask him the question about the big guy with the red and with the pitchfork and stuff like that. Have you talked about that at all?
No, I just started to introduce the idea of what was the Babylonian influence, and I just mentioned Zoroastrianism just to sort of get the thing started.
Yeah, I heard that when I first came on.
Think about that. So I just sort of mentioned that in casual. That's one of the topics that, because he had mentioned that the first century church was influenced by the Greeks, and he was saying well, this could be a good thing because he recognizes the scripture that says in the fullness of time, recognizes the power of the Greek language, where it's meant to be more stronger in describing philosophical terms. But then he's saying,
oh, and you said it to him, and he went, okay.
So because he was mentioning the Greek,
right, well,
I was talking about the Babylonian influence.
And that's how we got on Mystery Babylon. Yep.
Technically, I misspoke. It's the Persians that had the Zoroastrianism, so that was after the Babylonian.
Right.
Oh, I mean, if you want to just tell him really quickly and just run through it, but I mean, within the next 45 seconds, then yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, are we talking about Genesis 6? Is that where you wanted?
Everything. Just say and try to get everything in 35 seconds, and you can start.
I'm a little bit of weather. Okay, all right. So,
you're at 4 seconds already.
the Genesis chapter 6, it's obvious, you know, that the children of Israel were not to intermarry with other nations and stuff. And so when you have problems with intermarrying, that's where things get into play, because you were supposed to keep yourself pure, because that was the foreshadow of the Christians not marrying into the world. And so when you have in Genesis 6, you have two groups. You have basically it's the sons of Seth and it's the sons of Cain, and these two intermarried, and it makes sense. But a lot of people say, well, these are sons of God.
All
Well,
right,
I
time's up.
I went through a lot of
It is
scripture.
35
Everywhere
seconds
it
though.
said
But, yeah.
sons of God, children of God, they shall be my family, or they shall be my sons. Anything having to relate to relationship with God and a sonship. And every single time those were mentioned, except the possibility for Job, was not talking about some angelic being or anything like that. It was talking about the believers. And so we went through there, and then, you know, Job didn't mention. So that's no. But I didn't know, but there's a lot of people that believe that the sons of Seth versus sons of Cain thing, it's not all people that believe in Nephilim, and they somehow come down and had sex with women, and
Right.
then their offspring had these definite different spirits, where, you know, we know that God is the life-giving spirit, but somehow or another these guys had their own spirit, and then when they died they were a disembodied spirit, and that's where we get demons from and stuff like that. And it gets into this whole thing about futurism still, and all this ooh and ah and bells and whistles and stuff like that, and I'm just more practical myself.
Right. Right.
So basically, there's no such thing as like angels did not come down and have sex with humans, pretty much. And yeah, in that thing.
I mean, I believe that 3 years ago, and Zach believed it 2 years ago, and then we
I
just
would
took it.
agree that it makes a nice, compelling argument, but I mean,
It does. It is a compelling argument, and especially with the part about the giants. Doesn't one version call the Nephilim giants? I think
well,
that
the Hebrew word Nephilim, it literally means like giant.
it's a giant, right? But now, why do you guys think that there are giants? It almost seems like the flood was to get rid of the giants, but then it says the giants were after the flood as well. Isn't there a verse there that says
Yeah,
that?
Well, not
yeah,
only
yeah, and
that, but it says the
also in
giants,
Numbers.
right, but it also says the giants were there before the sons of God came down to the daughters of men.
Okay, yeah, that's so. There you go.
They're
Right.
before and after.
Right. So there's no reason,
And
but
then the time with Joshua and Caleb when they went inside the land, and they said we're like grasshoppers, and then the Hebrew word Nephilim is used again
and Kent Hovind, you
for
know, talks,
giants.
you know, that there was a lot of more oxygen content in the world before the flood, and so, you know, a lot of us are entertaining the idea, well, that's the reason why, you know, everyone was large. And so when Moses was writing about it and he was talking about these giants, well, according to Moses, they would have been giants to him because he was after the
I,
flood.
I still beg to differ on the that there were giants before. It's kind of like it's just a way of speaking English or whatever. You might, in my mind, like take the giant baseball team. You might say there was giants in those days. You're talking about the giant baseball team, and they came to be at a certain point in time. But it doesn't mean that there was a giant baseball team before there was an actual giant baseball team. It's just a phraseology.
So you're saying then that if you hold to that view, then did God fail when he made the flood to stomp out all the giants, and yet we still see that there were giants afterwards? If you're going to hold to that view, how do you find consistency in that?
Well, I'd have to say, how did we get giants afterwards?
So you're saying that you're entertaining the idea then that there would be two different ways to get giants. One would be from fallen spiritual beings, and that was completely wiped out. But then there would be another way to get giants as well.
Well, no, I'm saying, how did we get the second giants? I haven't really looked into that. Was Noah's bloodline, was one of the sons still tainted, or, what? How did we get the second giant would be my question.
We do have the idea of hyperbole too, where they exaggerate their speech, and we do it too. man, that man's arms are as big as my thighs, but we haven't really took a measuring, tape to measure to see for that. So the idea, I think I looked at, if you are a man and you're 6 feet tall, and I did the height of a grasshopper, and I compared that to what would that look like, and that is a 40-story building. So if you're just saying that we look like grasshoppers to them, and you want to try to get the size, and you want to take that actually literally, then that would be a 40-story building.
Yeah, but I mean, you've seen the fossils of giant footprints, right?
A 40-story building, I don't believe I have ever seen a footprint that would be that large. I mean, we're talking about a small crater. We're talking that several buses could fit into one footprint for a 40-story man.
Let me see if I can find a picture here.
And so 40 stories is how many feet? I forgot. Let me see.
It's probably about 400 feet.
I would think 600 probably. The story's probably 15 feet. Be my guess.
I was thinking more about 10 feet, but yeah, it could be 15 feet with tall ceilings.
So let's just be conservative, and let's just say it's 400 feet. So 400. Okay, so if I am a man and I am 6 feet tall, which is how many inches? 72?
72.
Okay, so if I'm going to look at the ratio between my foot size and my height, I am 72, but my feet are 12 inches. So if it's 72 divided by 12, that is 6. So let me do 12 divided by 72 so I can see the, okay.
So it's a sixth, 6 to 1.
0.16.
Right.
So 0.16 times 400 feet, which is, what is 400? Let me put the 400 times 12. We got to put that back into inches. And that's 768 inches. And then we take 768 and then we divide that by 12 to see how many feet. That is 64 feet. So their footprint was 64 feet long if you're going to take it literal.
Wait, how many inches did you say was in 400 feet? Did you just say 700?
768.
Is it? Maybe.
It's 4,800.
Yeah, it's got to be like, 400. Yeah, 4,800.
Right. I meant to do 12 times 12. I'm sorry. So, right. So, what is it?
I was about to say. So it's 4,800 inches.
Okay, so 48.
It'd be like a 66 foot footprint.
It's a 800 inches footprint divided by 12 would be 400. No.
66 point. Oh my God! Look at that. 66.666.
Yes, that's right. That's right. 66.666.
Oh, well, that settles it then.
It was definitely by Satan. Slam dunk, case solved.
Calculator's filled with sixes, guys.
Oh, that was actually great.
That was great.
Oh, jeez.
So that's
I guess there was time.
Yeah, 66.666.
That's 66 feet.
Feet long.
Right, yeah.
That's a 66 foot.
Did you see that picture I put up?
No. Where?
Oh, let me look.
It's in the Bible study chat.
That's not a 66-foot foot.
That's a 6-foot foot.
Right. And we have, the Og, wasn't his name? We have Goliath. We have, different people that were somewhat larger, but not nowhere near if you're going to take
Yeah,
Joshua.
but that's still a 36-foot giant.
Right, just not a 40-story giant. So
Yeah, I don't know if there was 40-story, but
well, my point is
definitely.
they had said that we look like grasshoppers to them. So if you get the average size of
I get what you're saying.
1 inch, and then the average size of a man, and I was even conservative because I said, well, these guys are Jews, so they're short. So I think I did a 5-foot tall man.
Well, is it Enoch that talks about how those giants ate the humans and would like grab them and bite their heads off?
I don't know. Albert would know that, but I don't know. I stay away from
that stuff comes from the Book of Enoch. But Josephus did say about the giants. He said they were men back in the day. Their countenances were so different from that of other men that they were terrifying to look at and to hear.
Right, and Nephilim also means bully, and they could have, covered themselves in blood, and also look at the samurai warriors, how they painted themselves with these really scary face and wore these masks and stuff. And they could have been doing the same thing that the Roman emperors were doing. They could have been eating from lead utensils and lead plates or something like that could have poisoned their minds. Or just pure bloodlust.
Yeah, I have no doubt that they were giants. I just don't think that they were so huge that it's ridiculous. There's got to be a limit there. Like, everything was still proportional. So if you're going to have a huge guy, then you got to have huge cows too. And you got to have huge, they got to be capable of getting equally as big so that they're proportional to you still.
Well, a whole flock for someone that tall would have been like just an hors d'oeuvre.
Right, but I mean, in Egypt, you see that some of the paintings and stuff that you see on the walls, they could have just maybe made it bigger just because they loved it so much. But there are pictures of like giant bulls, and like, the Native Americans tell the story of like the great white bull or whatever, the great white.
Have you guys ever seen the pictures on the hieroglyphics in Egypt?
Mm-hmm.
There's like pictures of like people carrying 2 of those bricks that were used to build the pyramids.
Yeah, there's also pictures of them carrying bulls, and like straight up carrying, or dudes that are as big as giraffes.
Yeah, there's like a picture of like this. It's like full blown, like there's like this, I don't know, like a sphinx or whatever the heck it is, and it's like the statue is really big. Like the people show you pictures of like humans today, like standing next to it, and like it's like way bigger than us. But the way that they pictured it on the wall of them building it was only 3 people building it.
Have you
and the
seen
thing was like huge.
What Doug believes?
Who's Doug?
Doug, he's come in a few times.
The universalist guy.
Yeah, universalist. The way I take it that he believes is that like geoformations are like they were so big they were like the 40-story people, and that they fell when they died. They're part of the earth now. Their bone structure and their veins have formed like geological formations in the earth.
So like
tunnels and they're and then the Illuminati and them are like digging out these geoformations for some type of secret of something or another. I don't quite understand it all, but it's definitely interesting.
Is Doug, the universalist, a futurist?
Yeah.
Partial preterist, yeah.
Partial preterist or a futurist?
Well, you're one and the same.
Yeah.
Right. We have a joke that a lot of times we say all doesn't necessarily mean all, because you can show lots of like all of Judea was coming out to be baptized by John and stuff. And then we also have that there's no such thing as a partial preterist. You're either a full or futurist because you're still expecting something
You
to
still
come.
expect, right? The reason I'm asking is because I was looking into universalism a couple of years back. Just had found it, never even knew it existed. So I was listening to different guys. There's a couple of guys online. They're what are their names? Sheridan, Dan Sheridan, and Martin Zender. They do, and they're still online. I saw them recently. They're hyper dispensationalists, and I figured, well, if you're going to believe that there's going to be a period in time where everything gets restored and everybody gets saved, you have to be a dispensationalist because you got to believe in that dispensation. After all the others are gone. So that's why I was curious to see if Doug was a futurist or dispensationalist. I should say.
That I don't know because I don't really know what a dispensationist is.
Yeah, they come up with 7 dispensations. I can't list them all, but and of course we're in the church age. That's where the term church age came from.
Right.
And then when Israel gets saved as a nation, that's going to be the millennial kingdom. And then there's going to be a yet another dispensation after that. That's where everybody gets saved if you're a universalist.
Gotcha. So it's just like 7 points in time, basically, that something major happens.
Yeah, in other words, they divide up the Bible instead of into covenant, like the covenant theologian will divide it into covenants, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I see 2 covenants.
Right.
I know there's the Abrahamic, but I don't see that. I mean the Noahic. I don't see that as like salvific, like the Abrahamic. I believe in is basically a promise of the new covenant. I see the Davidic is basically a promise of the new covenant as well, where Jesus is now king. But
Right. So the Noahic covenant was like a utilitarian covenant. It wasn't a salvation.
right,
Covenant.
right. So the covenant theologian will look at the Bible and divide it into covenants and say there are multiple covenants, how God deals with people, and some of them will go as far as saying he even got saved by works in the old covenant. And then the dispensationalists will mainly focus on these dispensationalists. God's working with people different ways through different dispensations. Totally butchering the word oikonomia, which is where I don't understand how they get dispensation from oikonomia anyway. It's really, we get our word economy from it. Yeah, universalism is a interesting thing.
I talked to another universalist recently, and we kind of talked about this a little bit. Okay, well, Jesus is obviously God's right-hand man, and then Satan would be the one doing the dirty work, so he would be the left-hand man. Now, if you were an employer and you had your 2 best workers, would you fire one of them? And he believes that everyone, including Satan and all the angels, everyone will be saved.
Yep.
The Eastern Orthodox Church fathers, they were saying because they're quite universalist actually in their belief system, but they said everyone is going to be saved except Satan and Arius, because Arius was a heretic beyond no other. So that those two, they even make icons, these religious pictures, and they show poor little Arius down there in a sea of black burning on fire, and they're all just like gloating over him.
That's interesting.
I've never even heard of this person.
Arius is the guy that said that Jesus was a man and man only. So he was like pretty much probably the first Unitarian.
Right.
Okay.
And they called it Arianism.
Right. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses are Arianists.
Is that like the Aryan Nation, or that's different?
No, that would be different.
Okay. I was thinking like, because you look at like Hitler, right? A lot of Jews were killed. Was that a work of God, basically, to keep the Jewish religion from growing compared to Christianity? And then the Indians, were they killed off because they worshipped creation instead of Christ? Were those the works of God?
Well, I do see like a work of God, at the Tower of Babel, and I was thinking about this today about science because science is so not the way it should be. A lot of people think, well, there's the Socratic method, you have a theory and you test it, and then you're either right or wrong, and you either add to that or you just dismiss it and start back at the drawing board. And that's not what they do. What they do, it's a closed community, and they, if you speak out against or try to make another experiment that is against what their belief system is, they will shut you up and you won't be able to, survive with a living with doing that. So
Right.
it's so close-minded and stuff. And so what they'll do is they'll make a theory and then they'll test it. And then when they find out they're wrong, then they'll just adjust their theory versus actually just go back and thing. And so I noticed that, and I'm thinking, well, if that's God's will and he's actually slowing them down, well, why would he do that? And then I'm thinking, okay, well, I wouldn't let a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old have my car keys and then go, drive away and go to the store because he's not mature enough to know what he's doing. And likewise, I noticed at the Tower of Babel, he says, behold, man is one, and now they will be able to do all things. And so what does he do? He slows them down.
Yeah, definitely. The science thing there, it's kind of like you say, a club, and then. But yeah, I mean, what were you thinking about, like slowing them down? You mean he's slowing down? I guess I'm a little confused. Who's being slowed down? The people that are trying to do the right thing, or
that God would be slowing down by confusing the scientific community, letting them compound on their mistakes and sort of keeping them so that we're not able to create such advanced technologies that we would have no business doing because we're not mature enough.
Oh, gotcha.
Because I was looking at paradoxes. Like, we believe that none of us can go back in time, right?
I definitely believe that.
Right. Me too. But what I see a paradox is a paradox is something that shows that your whole assertion has just been plain dumb, right? So we have the idea that, okay, you can go back in time, and there's still scientists that believe this. And even though they look at a paradox, they'll somehow try to explain it away because guess what? Their whole livelihood is based on, temporal studies and stuff like that. And they can't, do something else because it's privatized. That's what they've dedicated their life to, and they'll have to go back and learn and get another degree and all this stuff. So for instance, you say that you can go back in time, and then I just use a little bit of logic and I say, okay, so if I can go back in time, I build a time machine, I go back in time to where my parents were before I was born, and I kill my parents. Therefore, I should not exist to grow up and build a time machine to come back and kill my parents. And so it makes no logical sense. And so that shows that whole assumption that you can go back in time is not logically plausible. It's not, it's just ridiculous. But I did want to run this because, Matthew had been talking about how God has always been in time, right? And I don't want to use words that might, hang anybody up. So I think I can use my description before without using the word before, right? But so can you describe for me creation?
Oh, can I describe creation?
So I want to be able to use your vocabulary here, if I can do this.
I don't know if me describing creation is going to explain what I believe.
I know. I'm just trying to show this paradox. So I think you had mentioned something about the creation was going from nothingness to somethingness,
Yeah, in a physical sense.
right, in a physical sense. And you were saying that if you use the word before creation, that because you're having to use that denotes that time is depending upon itself. And what I would say to that is that language and mathematics is a type of language can actually describe the abstract. So if you are using before, what is your reference point? Your reference point would be creation. Okay, so let's just say, can I use mathematical terms like point A and point B in like a timeline? Would that
Sure.
be fair?
Sure, why not?
Okay, so in my understanding that you believe that time has always existed in the past and time always exists in the future.
Yes
There's
and no.
eternity on both ends.
Yes
Okay.
and no.
All right. What's no?
I would go so far as to say, see, before I say this, here's the problem with the word time. The word time itself, think about how we use it. We say, what time is it? Or I have no time. Or can you give me a little time? Every time you use it like that, you're really not using it in the sense that you think you're using it. Can you give someone some time? No, because time is not a thing to be given. Can you, like you just spoke about those scientists, and if you watch some of those shows, like I watched the documentary on time once, and I knew I was going to get aggravated with it, but I watched it anyway, and they were talking about how you can go back in time, and everything you saw on the television screen, was my computer screen, was a CGI, okay, a computer generated image.
Just like NASA.
Yeah, just like NASA. So they're showing you how you can warp time, you could dilate time. Now, I found one physicist online, and a guy looks crazy, and he looks like Fred Flintstone. And he gives a lecture on what is time. He goes against all the other physicists, and nobody regards this guy at all. And he gives a great lecture on what time is. His name is Bill Gaede, and it's spelled Gaede, something like that, Gaede. And I agree with him, and he's not a Christian in any sense. All he is a physicist that says, "Hey, all the physicists today." He actually Tesla said this. Nikola Tesla said in his day that the physicists have become mathematicians. They're not talking about physics anymore. They're coming up with mathematical equations that have nothing to do with reality. So that's what you see when you watch these shows. So when I talk about time, I think about it differently than you guys do, because I say time, I go as far as to say time doesn't exist. But we have to use the term because we're thinking about life. See, I say when you're dead, you're sleeping, and then when you wake up, it's like you just went to sleep. You didn't experience time. There was
Right.
no time for you. Okay. So time to me is what you experience. It's part of life. If you experience change, it's not even change, because some people define time as change. Well, that's not true. What if nothing changes? Time still went by. You still got older, is what I should say. Because here's the problem. Even the way I view time, I can't talk about it properly because I just said time goes by. No, cars go by. Time doesn't go by. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Planes, trains, automobiles, they go by. People walk by you, but time doesn't. So it's a problem when you talk about time. So I say time doesn't exist. It's just a constant. And the minute you start talking like it's a thing, like you can warp it, dilate it, twist it, speed it up, slow it down, travel through it like a tunnel, you've got it wrong, in my estimation. So I view time as something that's not a creation. It doesn't get created. If you're alive, things are happening and you're experiencing life. To me, that's time. So you have time before the first 4 days of creation. There's time. There's no sun and moon. traveling around, but yet there's morning and evening. So we don't need the sun for time, you know. So to me, God and like I said in the text chat, we mistake all the time. We get the terms eternality and timelessness confused. God, I say God is eternal. Now, if some Christian says, "Hey, God is atemporal," well, that just I say God's atemporal. But if I say that, somebody might think, well, "What do you mean? God is like atemporal?" Just simply means he's not in time. He's atemporal. But even then, I just said it again. How can you be in? Think about this. Can you be in time? No, you can go in a room or in a car. But that's the problem with the term time. You have to come to grips. You have to know that when you use it wrong, it's got to say something in your head like, wait a minute, you don't go in time. So even if I say, hey, God is in time, that's not really what I mean. It's such an odd word.
Right. I see. We're probably more in an agreement than what, we had thought, because we're just using different words trying to convey the same idea.
I mean, well, what about, like, in my view, like, I would say time is something like created. So, like, for example, when you look at, like, Genesis, when you look at just creation itself, like matter, we as humans don't have control over matter like God does. Would you agree on that statement?
Absolutely.
Like, we would be limited by matter. We would be, as you can say, in matter, like, in time, in matter. The same thing with space. Like, God can be in multiple places at once. He is not limited in one geographic location. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Okay, now with time, we have no, like, time, like, for us, we're stuck in it. Like, you can't look, like, truly look back. You truly, you can kind of remember things that went backwards, but you can't, like, literally go look at it. The 5 minutes into the future, you have no absolute idea. You can never be 100% on anything in the future whatsoever. Because if I said, hey, I'm going to come over your house tomorrow, but in 2 days I get into a car accident and die. Like, I didn't know that. So, but for me, like, when you do look at the Bible, God is actually above that. Like, he can say, oh yeah, in 400 years, like, to the day, this is what's going to happen.
And I say because he makes it happen.
We do too.
Yeah, but the thing is like, he makes it happen. Like, he's 100% for sure. There's no doubt. Like, when we say that,
right,
we are not.
Because we're not omnipotent.
Exactly.
Right.
So
we're subject.
With my statement.
Right.
But he's not. So he's not subjected.
But he also
so
changes
that's
his,
how I say.
Right. I hear you, and I totally get it. I mean, that's how I used to believe. I don't believe that anymore. I believe time is totally a different thing than what I used to think it was. I used to believe the scientists that said, well, at the Big Bang, 14.5 billion years ago, something was created, and let's call it space-time. Because
I mean, they would even say that time was created.
Yes, they do, at the Big Bang.
Yeah, but see, what I'm saying is God's before that.
Right. But
there's a really good study with the Greek verbiage in John 1:1 with the Greek word "ein," which is the imperfect form of "I me," like ego I me, like I am in existence.
Right.
So and I mean, it's a really deep study. It is, James White, he goes really deep into it, but pretty much, like, because John uses different verbs speaking about, like, for example, he uses, let me just pull up the Greek here if you want to, like, look at it. In John chapter 1, Like, I mean, I believe, like, John would pick words because they have meaning. And in John 1, it says, "Anarche and halagos," which is "in the beginning was." So this Greek word "was" is "ain," which is literally the imperfect form of "I me."
Right.
Right? And if you keep going, so what James White states is that this is before the beginning, before the creation, as far back as you want to push it, the word was already there, right? And I know in that statement you would disagree, but when you keep going, when the author John, or whoever is John, when he talks about a man in creation, he changes the verbiage. He doesn't say ain anymore. He uses the Greek word agenata, which is "there was a man," in verse 6. Agenata, anthropos. There was a man. And if you look at the verbiage, that is the verb in the sentence. So he changes, this verb here. And then when you keep going, and again, if I can just say again, this Greek word "ain" was used multiple times in verse 1, and also, I think it's one more, in verse 4. So pretty much what I'm saying, every single time when John is speaking about the Word of God before creation, he uses "ain." But then when he talks about people in creation, he uses another verb. And then, uh, when you look at verse 14, John changes the verbiage of Jesus. He doesn't use the imperfect form of "I me." He uses agenata, which is again in verse 14. He says, "And the word," and it says "kai ho lagos sarx agenata." He became, meaning that he left that perfect form of "ain," that before,
Yes.
like as far back as you want to push, like scientists would say 14 billion. So you can go before that, so that's why I would say, like, when you look at the verbiage that way, you can see, like, for some reason, like, before time, before there was creation, the word was perfect in that state. And that's how I'm kind of seeing, like, a before a time, like in our minds, like, that's like the other thing. Like, you keep saying, like, before or in the beginning. That's times, like, temporal. It's like literally time words. That's just because our minds can't fully comprehend something that's outside of time. It doesn't make any sense. But the Bible is conveying a message with these little verbs and showing you the temporal statement that, okay, before Jesus was a human, before he came into creation, it's a different verb. But then when he comes into creation, he uses agenata to show you the difference out of time, before time, then within time. So it shows you those two time periods, as you can say, even though one of them is technically not a time because it's outside of the time. But I don't know if that makes any sense, but
No,
it makes sense in my mind.
I understand what you're saying, but I see a problem in the, like I said in the text earlier today. If you have God existing outside of time, and it's not that hard to comprehend. If you draw a timeline on a piece of paper and then you draw a big cloud above it and you label that cloud outside of time and you put God in there, and then you label the timeline time, okay, and you put a beginning and an end to it, and that's the whole thing. That's not, first of all, there's going to be no end to this thing, but let's just say you do that with the timeline. So now God is there, he's outside of time, but then in the fullness of time, Jesus steps out of his timelessness and steps into time. Now, the problem that you have is that if God is outside of time and really doesn't have a past, present, and a future, he's just the eternal now, then God was always a man in eternity. He didn't become flesh. You
I don't
see,
I don't I don't understand,
in other words,
because like but the thing is, what I just brought up, I think would give merit to showing you that there's two different words being to describe exactly what you just said. If John would have used the same word "ain" to describe the word becoming flesh instead of using a genita like it was used with John the Baptist, I would have been like, okay, yeah, I can see that. But because John uses such a high form of, the imperfect form of "I me," the form of, the verb of being, I think that somewhat gives it merit to say, hey, listen, I mean,
Yeah, but
you can say what you're saying, but
I'm going beyond the words, and I'm looking at the concept. If God, we don't. I know what you're saying about the word. It is interesting how he uses the different forms of the Greek. But if God, if Jesus became a man in a point in time in our timeline,
Mhm.
okay, then but God is outside of time. I don't see how that would work, because now God would, and especially with you guys who say that he sees everything as if it's already happened. So that means Jesus was always Jesus. A son wasn't given. He was just there for eternity.
Okay,
It's like the same thing.
Right.
It's just like when you talk about, when I had mentioned, like, does he have control over matter and is he over space? So in my view, he can be outside of time, and then when he pleases, as he's looking at his picture or his creation, he can, because we are in time, he's outside of it. He's before, he's in it, he's through it. He can come into it at any moment that he wants. That's why it says, and how does the word say, at the fullness of time?
In the fullness of time.
But
Now,
it's not meaning that the fullness of time in him, because again, he would be outside.
Right,
The
you have to separate.
us.
Right, I know you're separating
Exactly.
the outside of in the in, and you're saying
exactly because
But you're just saying
he's
that God
in it and he's through it.
Right, and you're saying that because God is God. And I don't accept
Exactly.
if somebody says, "Can God?" Well, the Bible says God can't lie, right? So whether you want to really believe that or not, and it goes back to that stupid age-old question: Can God make a rock too big that he can't lift? That question speaks directly to this, because what it's getting at is, can God do anything? No. The answer has to be no.
So what you believe is that God has to go through time point A in order to get to time point B.
Well, he doesn't have to go through anything. He's just doing things. He's alive.
I'm trying to use language that you won't get a hang up on, and I don't know how to say it. But do you understand the idea that I'm asking? How can I ask it with language that you would accept? He has to experience before. I mean, I'm a man, so I know that I have a morning that I experienced today, and then I know that I had an afternoon. Are you saying that God likewise has to experience this morning before he can experience this afternoon?
Yes.
Okay.
In other words, God has a past, present, and a future.
Right. Okay. So that's fine. I mean, if I use the time A to get to time B, that's what I mean. He has to experience the morning before he experienced the afternoon. But earlier you had closed the timeline. You had said that time comes to an end on both, when you were sort of giving, like a argument for it. But what I'm saying is, why does it have to be closed? I would think that you would think that it would extend to where there would always be morning, afternoon, evening, always morning, afternoon, evening. And before that, even before light was created, the days and the years and stuff were used for that purpose, but that was still in existence all back before that too. So you've got creation, and then the timeline extends to forever on both sides, in the past and in the future.
I agree with that.
Correct? Okay.
Yes.
Now, this is the problem that I see. So you would agree that God will experience every single morning, every single afternoon, and every single evening in the future. And that is forever and ever, eternity, infinity. They're pretty much all the same. Would you agree to that?
Well, I don't know if he's got morning and evening in
Right, I know, but I'm just trying to use it
yes,
the language that you'll see that that what I mean by
yes,
going through time is
right,
he has to experience point A before he can get to point B. That he doesn't go outside and jump over A to get to B. Right? All
right.
right. So
That would be saying he could change the past.
right, right, absolutely. So we're in agreement with that. So as far as the past is concerned,
Mhm.
he had to experience a morning in the past before he could experience the following afternoon.
I would say
Right?
yes. I would say yes.
Okay. And so that past extends forever to infinity. So we have to say that God has experienced every morning, every afternoon in that infinity, right?
Right.
Okay. So as soon as we place a point in time, we do not call it infinity anymore. It's finite because it goes from that point forward to creation. Would you agree? So to keep the concept of infinity, we can't say, well, 500 million, billion, trillion Googleplex years ago, because then we make it, according to, compared to infinity, we make it an extremely small number, right? So
I.
if God had existed in this infinity in past,
Mhm.
would you agree that there is a time interval of infinite size before creation? If
Yes, but
God is living in infinity, there is a timeline before infinity must take place, that it is an infinite amount.
right. Yes, but we're going beyond what is written there. We don't know if God did this.
I know, I'm just using
Yeah.
logic,
Yeah.
but so what I'm saying is, if that's the case, and so I know that you don't hold to like what a lot of open theists do, but what I've been listening on open theist and their description of the timeline,
Mhm.
they do believe this, and I can totally see that if you look at infinity in the past, and there is an infinite, which means beyond measure, it just goes on and on and on interval before creation to take place, that creation would have never happened. In other words, we would still be waiting for the creation to take place. God had still not acted yet. And to me, that is a paradox. That's the same type of paradox of
Well, back up.
you going back in time.
Why couldn't creation have happened? I missed that logic.
Because God has existed in this infinite past.
Right.
And so there is a interval between him existing in that infinite past and the point in time of creation. And that is an infinite amount of time because the past is infinite as well. No matter how far you go back in time, you can go back even further in time.
Well, what if God existed? All right, so if you give God this timeline, I know where you're going. If you give God this timeline and you just stretch it out for eternal, uh, backwards and forwards, and creation, and you put a dot and you say that's the creation. Well, no one would ever be able to know how far before the creation. I mean, if God just existed eternally before that, which I believe he did,
Right.
I don't see why that's a problem.
Well, he has to go through. The thing is, the problem I'm having, he has to go through point A, or
Mhm.
he has to experience point A before he gets to point B. So there would be an infinite amount of A's and B's before he could get to the point where creation point A was.
What about you have a wedding band, obviously a circle, and you have the diamond on it.
Absolutely. And so you have to look at it, okay, well, okay, time is not linear then. Time is circular or something else. But from what I'm hearing from the open theist, they're not saying that. And what I'm just saying is that's a paradox because time would never be,
Right. Yeah, I see what
creation
you're
would never
saying,
be
Stacy.
here.
Because
And
if
because creation is here,
right,
then that assumption has to be wrong in some regard.
Yeah, I really don't follow, and I don't know if it's more I don't follow. It's more that I don't agree, because I think that God could have existed. Let's just say it's years. I mean, the Bible says his years extend. It could be a figure of speech, of course, but it says his years never end. He's got years. All those verses that I posted in there. Jesus waits at the right hand. God holds out his hand all day long. God is patient and not willing that any should perish. All of these time words are there for us to know who God is. I don't know why we would just suddenly say, now he's outside of time. The Bible just doesn't read that way. It just doesn't.
I see that, when he interacts with humankind, he does it in time.
Right.
But
Is
because
time different for us than him, though, too?
Is time different? Well,
That's a
with
good
God, a
question.
day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. But that's still talking about years and days. It's not talking about timelessness, is what I'm saying. You cannot find it in the Bible.
Because it's talking to us, we can't really stand
What
God
does
in that matter. If you could really put 100% of everything that God is in our mind, it just, to me, it doesn't make any sense because He's so much bigger than we are.
But Zach,
He comes to us. It's like
you can
it's like,
understand
for
what
example,
timelessness is, right? If the
not really. You can't. Okay. Tell me infinite. Truly, what does infinity mean? You cannot picture infinite. There's
You've
no
got
way. If your mind
infinite
can do it,
time,
it
size.
you can't.
Yes,
That's what I'm saying. So like space, all that stuff is like is what we're bound by. Only God is outside of all of creation
well,
in
I
that
want to
sense
I
because
want to speak to that bound thing because there's
that what thing?
the bound. Like you keep saying bound by time. Let me just put forth this. Because we need to eat, we need to breathe, right? Plenty of things as regarding time really matter to us. If we don't work enough, we don't make enough money, and we can't eat. If we have a certain amount of time to do something before the sun goes down, we're bound by time. We're limited. Time is affecting us greatly. That's because we're weak humans. God, even if God lives, quote, in time, you guys know what I mean, he's still not bound by it because God isn't bound by anything. He's omnipotent. See,
No,
like God doesn't have to eat. He doesn't run out of time and go, oh my God, the crops.
yeah, I'm not saying bound by time in that matter. I'm saying
Right.
have control over it. Like literally God can actually, okay, like for example, when I say time, space, and matter, I truly do believe that Genesis 1:1 teaches that. Like for sure. It's just because he just makes a declaration in verse 1. Because then all of a sudden earth is being created, the shamayim, the heavens is being created after verse 1. But it's like verse 1's like just like this main overall statement of the creation itself. This is why there would be quote unquote time before the sun, moon, and stars would happen. There's like a day, an evening, and a morning, right? It's because verse 1 declared it already. So how I see it is, again, in the beginning is time. When did this happen? There was a when. And then, heavens would be the space, where you're going to put it. And then earth, matter. What is it going to be? All these three things happen instantly. Because you can't have, seriously, you can't have space without matter. You can't have time. Like, when did you put the space there? You can't, like, that's even why, and again, just because scientists or philosophical people have the same understanding doesn't make them wrong, because they look at the same creation and it declares the glory of God. So just because somebody, oh, well, they have a timeless God, and that means it's wrong, and say that that's not true. But so how I'm seeing that he is over all those things is because, just like space, we are bound by space, meaning that I can't be where I'm at in South Florida and be in Japan and then be at your house and be at Stacy's house all at the same time. I'm completely limited by my space and space by that. And then same thing with matter. I cannot manipulate atoms. I cannot manipulate things in creation by like the sun. I can't do that. I'm super limited. I mean, of course I can pick up, a screwdriver or whatever, but I can't like take that screwdriver and turn it into a monkey. And then the same thing with time. I can't tell you exactly with 100% certainty that tomorrow morning I'm going to be at work at 8 o'clock. And then also, when I'm at work, this is going to happen throughout the day. But when you read the Bible, is so clear that God, with certain doubt, there's no question in my mind that Herod, because again, it's not just that he goes, okay, you know what, I want, 4,000 years in the future, I want Jesus to die on a cross, but I'm just going to look in time and see who is going to be the best suit to get done. I believe like Herod, Pontius Pilate, the Gentiles, the Jewish nation at that time, they were all put in that exact place for that exact point from the foundation of the world. Not just that he looked and said, I have this guy Pontius Pilate. Maybe he might be the one that, might be ruling at the time. Let me just, try to see if that might play out. I think it was for certain. Pilate, that was his role. Pharaoh, he was raised up for a specific reason. And just all those things. So again, that's how I kind of see how he is not bound by time.
Right. And I don't want
so
you
he
guys.
is above it.
I don't want you to see. I think my view of God's power is equally as as great as yours is. I don't diminish God. I don't want you to think that by any stretch. But I do see him. Like if I pray right now, I believe God hears it right now. And I believe that God's walking with us on a in real time, just like we read all the stories we read. I mean, it's the whole Bible is where God is working. He's changing his mind. He's dealing with mankind. Moses says, "No, please don't kill the people." There you. Oh, okay, Moses. Like these things to me make God into this loving Abba Father who's operating in real time. I have to go outside the Bible to say, well, God is outside of time. But the thing is, I forgot what I was going to say. Go ahead.
I would have to definitely disagree with that. I have to go outside the Bible.
Yeah, because I
just
don't.
Like this, just like the same thing you'd have to go through, like saying that it's not in the Bible because philosophical, Plato or whatever, Plato, like these people say the same thing I'm saying. So that makes me going outside the Bible. Like I said, when I look at scripture, I'm seeing two different perspectives. So that when Moses goes and pleads with God, he says, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What, did God like forget? He's like, oh yeah, I can't kill you guys because that's right. I made a promise and I can't, do away with that. It's just like, I don't think that that's truly was God's intention when he said, I'm going to kill everybody and start off with you. And then that's when Moses pleaded. I think it's all pointing to Christ. It's showing you Christ is going to be our intercession on our behalf. So when you look at it that way, it's like a symbolic, it's not like literal. It's like you're not going to pull something over on God and be like, oh, well, I didn't think that, Well, even the verse that says, I didn't think it was possible. That's still God speaking to us. It's like when you, my son's not even 2 years old yet. And when I speak to him, I have to bow. I have to go on my knees and get in his level and speak to him on his level. I'm not just going to start using, like super big words and make him really try to understand what I'm saying. I would go to him on his level so he would understand me, just like an Abba Father would.
Of course,
so
I get
again,
that.
we don't have that mind of God.
But here's the thing: we'll never convince each other because we hold to different models. See, my model has a free will. Now, and with a free will comes a God that's working with man. Not working with him, like he needs to work with him, but he's dealing with us. It also comes with God operating in time.
Can I ask you a question about free will real quick so I can get a better understanding, because free will is such an open term. Free will, do you mean only as far as choosing God versus choosing death? Or do you mean free will as in I am control of my thoughts? Or what? What is your idea of free will there? I mean, so how limited is because obviously you'll agree, when the Lord said you can't add an inch to your stature, you can't turn your hair gray or black, and stuff like that. And so also we have, well, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And James says, do say that you're going to do something God willing. So we do know that, but where I want to recognize where your limitations of that free will are. Is it just for choosing salvation or what?
Well, it's definitely with choosing salvation. And like I said, I see a lot of predestination happening in the old covenant. I see a lot of God um, overriding man's free will to bring about the prophecies. If he says, "Hey, this is going to happen," well, how does he make it happen? He
Omnipotent.
overrides free will. Omnipotence, yes, he overrides free will. We
So
agree.
what about our
Now,
thought?
yes. Now, our thoughts, of course, our thoughts are certainly influenced by a lot of things. It's our genetics. It's what happened today when we woke up. It's what we put into our brains. They're influenced by different things. They're influenced by what we believe, and then that influences a different thought or another thought, and so on and so forth. So, but I'm not fatalistic in that somebody outside of me has determined this. Now you're going to say this. Now you're going to do that. Now you're going to think that. Now you're going to sin. Now you're going to be good. Now, no, I don't see that in the Bible anywhere. I see man's volition, unless and until, and this is only when God intervenes in man's free will. You could never prove for the last 2,000 years that God does this because none of it's written down in the Bible. You can only prove, the best you guys could do is show me what was written 2,000 years ago. So,
Right.
and what
Evidence.
I'm saying is that in the old covenant and the stories that we read the same story out of the same book. We see God dealing with man in real time. We see God giving man choices. And we see God getting disappointed. We see God getting angry. We see God expecting things. I mean, it's just there in black and white. And for you to say, no, that's just so we can understand it, I believe is not holding true to the plain sense of the meaning of the stories and words. It's this, I used to believe the same way. And I think I was taught it when I went to church. And when I decided, no, I'm gonna leave the church. I'm gonna read the Bible and I'm gonna believe what it says. I'm gonna try to put it all together. That's what I came up with. Nobody said to me, "Hey, open theism is it? Go check it out." I got it from the Bible. Just like when I'm not saying God spoke it to me. The only thing that I will ever say that God said to me is, I am not that. I am that he in Daniel 9:27. That's it. Everything else I just got by reading the word and saying, wow, why have they been telling me this when I'm reading that? So I put it together, and I've never been a Calvinist. I've always believed in free will. And when I put it together with what I saw God in time, now the model kind of makes sense. That's why I said in the text earlier that your model makes sense. If you believe there is no free will, and you believe God is outside of time, and you believe that God decreed everything, well, that's pretty consistent. I see the logic. I see where it works. So if I just disagree in one point, I don't think that would make any sense at all. Like, it would be hard for me to convince you guys, hey guys, you got to scrap the God being in outside of time thing. You got to scrap the free will thing, all at once. You're never going to do that, but because you can't just take one part of it, because you're making it try to work logically in the model.
Right. I understand what you're saying, and that's totally fine. But as far as you're right that nothing has been written down for the last 2,000 years as far as Bible scripture is concerned. But, we do have like a modus operandi of God. We do have a nature that continues to work. So if he's worked this way in the past, he might also be working that way in the future. And that evidence of absence is not absence of evidence.
Correct.
But I was thinking earlier that, I've entertained this idea before about free will and stuff, and I know you would not agree with me, but I could see that your approach would totally work and totally be consistent in my eyes if I looked at all of the old covenant was completely predetermined, and yet when we have those instances of changing his mind or asking for a choice and stuff, it was to teach it to little children, like what Zach had said. But now the new covenant is so radically different that now that we are in the age of the church and the age of Christ, we would have that free will. And I could see that being completely, so all you would have to do in that instance is just adopt the telling the story through the eyes of God versus the eyes of man. That would be the only difference. But I could see that completely being consistent in that sense, if you understand what I'm saying.
Of course I do, but that's part of my argument, is that in the old covenant, God had to set up the shadows, the types, the prophecies.
Right. It
And
should say that, he did it partly, but then he still allowed free will to take place.
I still see free will happening in the old covenant. Like, in other words, just because, and I think the old covenant, of course, Jesus was born under the law. So he was born in the old covenant, right? So now you have, up until the cross, technically the old covenant. So Judas is in the old covenant. Now, if Judas was meant to betray Jesus, that doesn't have to mean that every action that Judas ever took from the time he was born was decreed. It doesn't have to mean that at all. And we don't read that. What we read is that Judas did this and that was prophesied.
Right,
See
but
what
we
I'm
really
saying?
have no idea of all of the actions that were dependent upon to get Judas to that day.
True.
So we have no way of knowing how many variables did God need to manipulate for that. So it's just, I guess, would be natural for us to say, well, then he had to manipulate all
Right.
variables. We have no idea of knowing whether it was 10 billion, quadrillion, or, just a few variables to push him one way, because,
And,
he would know that, well, he walked this area, he could have been killed by bandits, and then Judas wouldn't
right.
story
Well,
anymore.
and on that note, like when Jesus went and picked out the 12, it, in my mind, it could go one of two ways. Those guys could have been literally born for that purpose, and their mom named them exactly what they were supposed to be named. Or Jesus could have come and he could have been looking around and said, that's the one, without anything happening prior to it. Or it could have been a mix.
Right. And so you're saying, yeah, I understand. So you're saying before, when I saw your comment, that, yeah, he can declare it, but then he can work it out in time. But you have to admit things like the naming of Cyrus when he was a baby, that's obviously taking away the will of the parents, because that was specifically prophesied. So we have really no idea of the extent of his declarations to come about this prophecy, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Cyrus is the one who gave the decree to restore and rebuild the temple. I mean, that's a huge part of the new covenant prophecy. A huge part of the coming of Jesus. So yes, I mean, look at John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist is basically a Nazarite, or he's a Nazarite. His mom is barren. Look at, and he's
the last Levitical priest.
And not only that, he's the herald of the king, of the coming king, right?
Before you start, let me just tell you something really quick. Okay, so Zach, right?
Yeah.
Do you know that his wife's name Elizabeth? You know that they just had a little boy and they named him John?
Oh, that is so awesome.
I just wanted to tell you that real quick. So
that is so awesome. And Elizabeth is Elisheba in Hebrew, and it means daughter of God, I think. Oh no, it means daughter of seven. Ili, God, and Sheba, seven.
Okay.
Anyway, what I was getting at with John the Baptist is that when Hannah and Elkanah couldn't have a baby, she was barren. She prayed. God gave and made a vow. God gave her Samuel. So, and Samuel was a Nazarite. He was a picture and a foreshadow of John the Baptist, it seems to me, because how many Nazarites do you read about in the Bible? What do you have?
Samson.
You have Samson, maybe. That's it.
Maybe the guys that were with Paul in Acts 21.
Right. So,
that's right.
All these things are like, and here's why I've argued with open theists who think that everything is open. And I'm like, there's this one guy who's got a channel called God is Open. And I made some comments on some of his videos, and then he chimed in and we had conversations, and I was trying to tell him, You're giving open theism a really bad name. How could everything be open? Don't you see all the prophecies that God set up, all the things that God, and literally telling, like, you guys know how I read Ephesians 1 now. I read it like the apostles were predestinated from before the foundation. That's why Jesus could walk up to them and say, "Follow me," and there was no questions asked. They followed him. And if they weren't predestined personally, well, then it was predestined that there would be 12 apostles. I mean, there's 12 constellations, 12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
You know, so I argue with these guys. Even Bob Enyart is another one who actually thinks that God could have changed his mind about the cross when Jesus prayed, Gethsemane.
Oh, I got the clip. Can I show you this clip real quick?
Yeah.
All right. This guy turned vicious. I don't. When I look at debates, usually they're pretty civil. And every now and then you'll see a debate where one guy was talking. There was this Calvinist, and he was like, "Well, I don't even want to call you my brother," and just totally,
I bet you I saw it. What is it?
I forgot. It's two Calvinists against two Arminians, and one was just like screaming and yelling and saying, "I don't even want to call you my brother" and stuff.
Oh, that's Leighton Flowers.
Was that Leighton Flowers?
Yeah, and Jonathan Pritchett. Yeah, and
okay,
Dr. Zachariades.
Okay, so I want to start at, let's see, around, because this was a question concerning time, right? And could God change his mind? So let me start here. I'll share my screen. If you just click on my my little duck,
yep.
It'll magnify your screen so you can see it. So if anybody makes a sound, it won't. Hold on a second.
The following presentation is a production.
Let me share the screen real quick. Okay.
Of Alpha and Omega Ministries Incorporated and is protected by copyright laws of the United States and its international treaties.
That's not
Copy
good.
and distribution of this production without the expressed written.
Oh, that's Bob Enyart.
That moment.
Can I do this, Albert?
Probably not with that warning.
Okay, then you want to take the live off for us?
Sure.